Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Wisco Whiskey Review with me, Jeff. Now today's episode I'm going to try to answer the question, does whiskey go bad? Now with that I'm going to do a little experiment here. I was gifted this bottle of Highland Park 12 from a coworker who was cleaning out his cabinets. He had this old bottle, he just wasn't really going to drink it, gifted it to me, and I thought it'd be really fun to compare it to this newer bottle of Highland Park 12 that's only been open for about 2 to 3 months or so. He claims that this bottle here has been open for at least 3 years, maybe more. And if you can tell just from the level, in this bottle, there's not much left in it. There's a lot of air in the bottle. I don't know if it's been this low for that long or exactly what the history of it, but it's definitely an older bottle. It's been open for a while. This one's a newer one, hasn't been. So what I'm going to do is I'll talk about the different ways and the different things that can affect your whiskey potentially after you've opened it. I'll kind of go through like the kind of generalistics of when you should finish whiskey by, based off of my own kind of limited research and what I've heard and been told. And then we'll just do an A/B comparison. I'll do this blind, and I thought this would be a really fun experiment to see if this old, most likely oxidized whiskey is going to taste drastically different or even a little bit different than this newer Highland Park 12, which again is the exact same whiskey, just a newer bottle, hasn't been oxidized as much. So to get into the different things that can affect whiskey once you open it, the number one kind of antagonist to whiskey as far as it sitting in the bottle is oxidation and air. So as soon as you open a bottle of whiskey, you're introducing air from the environment into that bottle. Now as time goes on and the whiskey gets lower in the bottle, you're introducing more and more air into that bottle, which is going to chemically react with that whiskey. Now I don't know all of the science behind it. I'm sure there's a ton of different things going on, and if I can find a link to an article or something, I might try and link that down below if you want to do more research on that for yourself. But I just know that air it has a tendency to flatten out whiskey, to kind of mute some of the flavors after it's been sitting for a while. So again, you can see this, there's this much room in there, whereas this one, do this so you can kind of see the difference a little bit more. There's just a ton of more air in this bottle than this one, and this has been sitting a lot longer too. So oxidation and air is kind of the number one enemy of keeping your whiskey fresh and tasting the best for as long as it will. Now the second thing is going to be direct sunlight. Now again, it's going to be a chemical process that's happening. You want to try and keep your whiskey out of direct sunlight as much as possible, just to protect the longevity of the whiskey. I wouldn't say it's going to necessarily ruin it, especially super quickly, but it's just something you want to keep in mind. If you've got a whiskey cabinet with glass windows or something like that, or if your whiskey is just kind of sitting out in the open like mine is behind me, you're going to want to keep it in a relatively darkened place if you can, or one that just doesn't get a lot of direct sunlight. Indirect sunlight I think would be fine. It's just you don't want to get that like really super hot direct sunlight on it. The next thing kind of goes along with that is going to be extreme temperature swings. So you don't want to store your whiskey in a super cold or super hot or humid environment, because that can also affect the whiskey. It's going to just flatten it out over time and just kind of not have it taste the exact same as when you bought it, for as long of a time. So it's kind of those three things. Again, oxidation or air, you've got direct sunlight, and then you've got extreme temperatures. So those are the three things to look out for when you're storing whiskey. Also when you're storing whiskey, depending on if it's an actual cork cap or if it's something else, you don't want to store whiskey on its side if it has a cork. Now with wine you do, because the wine kind of helps keep that cork moist and helps keep that in there, otherwise it dries out. But with whiskey, the alcohol content's a lot higher. So there's just a difference there. You don't want the cork drying out from the alcohol, so you actually want to keep whiskey bottles upright when you're storing them. That's kind of a difference between wine and whiskey that I thought was interesting. So now to kind of answer the question of how long should you keep a bottle of whiskey open, and what you can do after that point. So everything that I've heard and all the research I've done has stated that you should probably finish a bottle of whiskey about within a year after opening it. Now again, there's going to be a lot of factors there, like I mentioned before, how many times you're opening and closing the bottle, reintroducing that air in there, where you're storing it, again, has a big influence on how long it's going to last. But about a year is, from what I understand from a lot of different sources, kind of what you should shoot for as far as finishing a bottle by. Anything beyond that, when you get to 2, 3, 4 years plus, and again, this is all kind of determined on a lot of different things, a lot of environmental factors. If you have a bottle that's sitting like this one, where it doesn't have a lot of air in the bottle, and that sits for 2, 3 years, and then you drink it down, that's probably going to be not quite as bad as if it's sitting like this for 2 or 3 years, where there's a lot of air interacting with that whiskey and oxidizing it. So again, that's kind of my short and fast answer about how long you should wait to drink whiskey or to drink a bottle, is try to keep it within 1 year. If it's 2 or 3, it's still going to be drinkable. It just might not have quite as many flavors going on, or those flavors might be a little bit muted. That is what tends to happen when whiskey sits too long. All right, so just to kind of introduce the whiskey, I'll be comparing here real quick. As I said before, this is Highland Park. This is a Highland Distillery Scotch. So it's in the very, very northern part of Scotland. This is actually distilled in Kirkwall on the Orkney Islands in Scotland, which is one of, if not the most northern distillery in Scotland that produces Scotch. So they're both 43% alcohol, and this is going to be slightly peated, so that kind of might affect the oxidation. I'm not sure what all the science behind that is, but we're going to find out. So again, we got the old bottle here. Pour a little bit in here. Now what I've done is I've marked the bottom of these Glencairns. This says old on the bottom, and this one says new. So that way at the end I'll be able to tell which one's which, but I'm going to mix these up so that I don't know which one's which. I should be able to do that pretty quickly. I'll make sure that there's the same amount of whiskey in each one, so that I won't be able to tell just from the amount of whiskey that's in there either. Alright, that's pretty close. I should have probably used a jigger or something to measure these out so they're exact same, but I think I got it pretty close. Now also I want to make a note that even though I've had this one, I have not smelled nor tasted this bottle yet. This again was given to me from a coworker. I was very thoughtful of them, and kind of a really cool thing. So I have not tasted or smelled this at all before, so that's not going to affect this little experiment here at all. We'll set these aside here, and I'm going to mix these up. Alright, so I have no idea which one of these is which. So I'm going to go, I guess, from your left to your right. It'd be my right to left here because it's mirrored. Alright, so let's smell this first one here. Okay, and I want to preface this by saying that the point of this little experiment isn't really to guess which one's which, right? That's not what I'm doing here. I might do that at the end before I do the reveal, but the main thing is just to see if oxidation and age of whiskey in a bottle, once it's been opened, has a dramatic and direct effect on the whiskey. That's kind of what I want to answer by doing this. Alright, so there's definitely, there is some smoke on this. Like I said, it's lightly peated. You can smell that smoke right off the beginning here. I am getting some red fruit too. I can't tell if it's like a strawberry or a cherry. I'm getting kind of that weird like wheat and fruit, like red vines note on this one here a little bit. Yeah, I mean, compared to some of your Islay whiskeys, this isn't like just straight up smoke. It's not just peat. There's a lot going on. which is one of the reasons I really tend to like Highland Park, the little that I've had so far, is because it's a nice balance of that smoke, but you also get, there's a lot of caramel and vanilla coming through on this one. It's really well balanced. Let's go in for a sip. So you get that kind of that peat smoke characteristic right in the beginning, and then it kind of trails off into that fruit that I mentioned, that like red fruit, the cherry, strawberry a little bit. There is just a little bit of kind of a salty brininess to this too, which it could be coming from like there's the salt air and just the environment that this is being distilled in. All right, so that's pretty good. Like I said, the fruits there's caramel, there's vanilla, not a whole lot of oak or any like wood necessarily, but there is that peat smoke coming through. All right, so let's go to the second one here. Let's give this a nose. Wow, okay, so here, let me go back to this one. Okay, so there is a definite difference going on between these two. This one to me seems a lot brighter. It's like a lot of just bright red fruit coming up. Quite a bit more than this one, at least in the initial nosing. Yeah, the peat is a little bit more subdued on this one. And again, I don't know which one's which, so it'll be interesting to see kind of what that oxidation did to this, but I can tell there's a definite difference. Let's go in for a taste here on this one. All right, so there's a little bit more kind of that ethanol, and not that these are very, you know, high up there on the ABV at all. These are 43%, so, you know, pretty low on the alcohol, but you can taste the alcohol a little bit more on this one in the front. Yeah, there's just a lot more bright fruit going on in this one, and the flavor too, as well as the nose. And the peat kind of takes a back seat on this one. It's a lot more subtle than it was on this one. And I'll go kind of back to this one too. Again, not so I'm just trying one and then the other, but I'm gonna compare the two back and forth here just so I'm being fair to both of them. But so far this one's a lot brighter, a lot more fruit forward. There is that peat, but it's kind of on the back end this time instead of being more toward the front. That's really interesting. Yeah, the fruit is way more kind of subtle on this one than it is with this one. This one's a lot sweeter. You know, even that kind of caramel vanilla is popping out a lot more on this one too. Yeah, the peat stands out more on this one. And again, it's not going to blow you away. You know, this isn't terribly smoky whiskey, but just the comparison between the two of them, that's one of the cool things about doing an A/B comparison like this, or a blind flight if you want. It's one of my favorite things, you know, about exploring whiskeys, to really compare two different things that either are similar and you want to find differences, or that are just completely different and you want to see which one you like better. I don't think there's really any better way to do that than to directly compare two or more at the same time, just kind of back to back like this, because that's what really helps your brain and helps your nose and your palate really pick out, you know, differences between the two. I know for me it's just really hard, you know, if I have one type of whiskey one day and then I have a different one the other day, you know, there isn't that direct comparison. So it's just a lot easier for me to pick out just nuances and, you know, to figure out which ones I actually like better just by doing a quick comparison like this. There's kind of a deeper, darker caramel going on with this one. Even though this one comes off as brighter and sweeter, this is kind of more subtle, it's more mellow, it seems more subdued in all the flavors total, but especially those fruit flavors, they're really kind of down below. You gotta search for them a little bit more. And now that I've gone back to this one, this tends to have just, to me, just a little bit of like mustiness, or like not quite metallic, but just like a dusty, musty kind of note in the middle of the palate that I'm picking up on that this didn't have. This one's way more vibrant. Like I said, the ethanol pop is there. It seems to kind of dance on the tongue a little bit more. You know, hopefully I haven't beaten a dead horse here by talking about these. Hopefully you guys find this maybe not as exciting as I am right now, because I'm the one doing this, but hopefully you find it entertaining at least. If I had to guess, and again, this is at the tail end of it, I think this answered the first question and what I wanted to know. is, does oxidation make a difference? You know, from taking a bottle that's newer to one that's obviously been open for a while. I would say yes, absolutely. In this case, you know, with these specific ones, oxidation definitely changed the character and the flavor, both the nose and the palate and the finish of this whiskey, because again, it's the same whiskey, just older versus newer. So oxidation definitely changed this. You know, and again, if you like more flavor, I tend to prefer this one so far right now because it has that brighter flavor. You know, they just pop a little bit more. Whereas this one's kind of, you know, mellow, musty, kind of almost dusty tasting. So, you know, if you're following along, I'm gonna guess this is the older one. I'm gonna guess this is the newer one here. Let's find out. All right, so I was absolutely correct. And that kind of just goes to show, again, in this specific example, oxidation plays a big part in storing your whiskey. All right, so one last thing I wanted to mention is one thing you can do in order to avoid this oxidation problem is to kind of create and invest in an infinity bottle. Now what that is it's going to be an old decanter or an old bottle, pretty much of anything you can use. You just want to make sure it has a nice secure top on it. That's kind of one of the main things. And what you do is, as your bottles that you're drinking kind of get down to like a fourth full, maybe even down to like just a couple sips left, you're going to be adding those to this bottle. And eventually, you know, it starts filling up. You're kind of creating a blend almost, assuming you're drinking different types of whiskeys. And what's cool is you can even just have different types of infinity bottles. So like me, I have a bourbon specific infinity bottle. I have a Scotch or a malt version. I even have, I think, a Japanese or Irish one. So it's kind of cool. You can, you know, just start this anytime you want, and you know, as long as you just don't drink the same bottle all the time, which even then you could. But as it gets low in the bottle, instead of letting that oxidize in the bottle, you just add it to the infinity bottle, and eventually, you know, that's going to start getting up there. And then once it gets up to a certain point and it's so full, you know, you can pour some out, taste test it, and then just add something else to it. So you always want the infinity bottle level, I would say at least half full if you can. I know that's not going to be usually in the beginning unless you want to start with something, you know, like a base, and then just start adding to it. That way, again, in that decanter, it's not going to get oxidized as quickly. The more full you can have a bottle, the longer the whiskey's going to stay the same, or I guess, or you know, not flatten out. Because again, like I said, with this experiment, it's pretty clearly to me that oxidation affects whiskey. I wasn't really sure before this. You know, I've heard of it happening. I know that it was probably a thing, but until you actually compare like this, it's, you know, it really helps it stick in your head. So in order to do that, like I said, an infinity bottle works great. Or the other thing is, you know, if you're getting a bottle low, you could invite some friends over, you know, and split what's left of the bottle, you know, share the bottle. That's one of the great things about whiskey is sharing, you know, conversing about it, nerding out about it. All right, so that's going to be it for me, guys. Thanks for watching. I hope this answers some of the questions you might have had about, you know, does whiskey go bad? How long should I let a whiskey sit in a bottle? What can I do about it if it has been sitting in a bottle for too long? Just things like that. They're just questions that you might not ask yourself, but they pop up every once in a while. So thanks for watching. I hope you like this. If you do, please like, comment, subscribe down below. That really helps me out a lot. And yeah, I've got a new microphone, so hopefully the audio quality is better on this one. I'll have to you know, listen back during the editing and see, but I'm trying to, you know, little by little increase the production quality for you guys. So thanks again for watching. Again, oxidation happens, definitely affects the whiskey, so, you know, within reason, try to drink those whiskeys up, try to share them, all that good stuff. Thanks for watching, guys. Keep on sipping, and cheers.